Today we're going to talk about 3.1, the French and Indian War. So who fought who? So we have the Redcoats, are professional British troops, and we have the Bluecoats, who are amateur American militia. So these people are not trained. The Redcoats are very well trained. They are professionally paid soldiers, so they're a very good army. And then the Bluecoats, not so much. And they're going to fight first the Whitecoats, who are professionally trained French troops, and the No-Coats, which are the Native American Indians. So the French and the Indians, they're going to join the same side because they were better friends. The Indians liked the French much better than they liked the British or the Americans at the time. That's because the French traded fur with the natives and tried to live with the natives, where the British just basically ran the Indians off the land. So some background, European countries were constantly fighting. European countries tried to control as much land and as much trade as possible. And England, France, and Spain, they all hated each other. So if you look over at the triangle on the left, the northern part, the top part of the triangle, this is England. And then to the right here is France. And then over here to the left is Spain. And so there are three countries that are all not too far from each other. And they're always fighting for power in Europe. They're always constantly at war. And they are all three rivals. So we're going to talk about mercantilism. So mercantilism is an economic practice by which governments use their economies to gain power or wealth at the expense of the other countries. So controlling trade to benefit the mother country is a shorter definition. So if you look at the illustration up at the top, I believe this was on a former STAR test at some point. And if you just look at the picture for a second, try to figure out, what it's representing. So the maids represent the colonies. It says colony on each maid. And notice they are all carrying a plate full of food. In this case, the food is gold, silver, food stuff, which would be crops, and then raw materials, such as like lumber. And they're serving this to the person labeled as the mother country. So in this case, it would be England. So this represents England. The colonies are represented by the maids, and the maids are giving all these things away to the mother country, in this case, England. So they're giving away food, silver, crops, and raw material to England. And if you notice the woman in the picture, okay, she is a larger woman, and that represents her wealth. So as these colonists bring more gold, silver, crops, and raw material, this mother country is going to continue to get bigger. Okay, in this case, more wealthy. So mercantilism allows the mother country to become very wealthy. In this case, Britain becomes very wealthy from mercantilism. Notice that the ladies that are the maids, notice that they are very, very skinny. And that is because everything that they work for, they're not getting to eat the, in this case, gold, silver, the crops, or the raw material. They're having to give it all to Britain, the mother country. So in this case, the maids are super skinny because it represents their wealth. They are not wealthy at all. They're just starting out, and they're giving all of their wealth to the mother country. So we have some of the navigation acts, and basically all the navigation acts did is basically controlling trade to where the 13 colonies could only trade with Great Britain. Okay, so now the navigation acts is a bunch of different acts all put together. So you have the Act of 1651, the Act of 1660, the Woolen Act, the Hat Act, the Molasses Act, Iron Act. Okay, but all of these basically control trade. And so they're all examples of mercantilism. So all laws that help mercantilism. So those all benefit the mother country. Colonial land grab. Colonists bumped into each other. Colonists explored each other's land. Colonists explored or claimed each other's land. So the reason for this is that there were no fences at the time. So think about today. Most property lines are formed with fences or roads or something that's a definite boundary, to where then there were no fences. So it was a struggle to tell where your land ended and where your neighbor's land began. And so at that time, people would say, hey, I own all the land up until that set of trees, or I own the land on this side of that big rock, or I own the land, all the way up till this to the creek. Well, what happens when a grass fire comes through and burns down that group of trees, or something happens and the rock gets moved, or maybe the river or creek is rerouted and it changes path? Now there's an argument over whose land is whose. And land equals power at the time, and every single person wanted as much land as possible. So you and your neighbor a lot of times are fighting over the same land. There's going to be that gray area of what is my land, what is your land. And then also you have the Native Americans, who they were always caught in the middle of this because they were there first, yet what land is theirs? You're going to have land that the Native Americans believe is theirs, but then you're going to have Europeans coming and claiming that same land that has already been claimed. So in the 1750s, France started building forts. Okay, now these forts, don't think of this fort as just somewhere to fight from behind. These forts were mostly trading posts. So it'd be a place to where people in the area could go and trade goods, buy things, sell things, trade with Indians. And these trading posts were around the Great Lakes. And France started building them. Why? Because they wanted to trade with Indians. They wanted to trade fur with Indians. And so the Ohio River Valley is right here in this red circle that the red arrow is pointing to. And this is the land that the French are trying to build these forts, these trading posts in. Now, the problem is that England wants this same land known as the Ohio River Valley. So we're going to talk about George Washington. So the Ohio River Valley is in western Pennsylvania. So England wanted this land for farming because of the soil. The soil was rich. So if you think of a valley that's near a river, it has water. Okay, the valleys is where grass is going to grow very well because the soil is rich. A lot of the rain from the mountains or the hills will run down to this valley. So it's very good for farming. You have George Washington, was a wealthy planter and a member of the Virginia militia, which is a group of volunteer soldiers. George Washington and the militia go to Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania, to build, or they're trying to build a road through the Appalachian Mountains. So Virginia could settle into the Ohio River Valley. So on the western side of Virginia is the Appalachian Mountains. It's a mountain range, and George Washington and the militia are going to go there and try to build a road that cuts through the Appalachian Mountains so settlers can leave Virginia and get to the Ohio River Valley somewhat easily and not have to cross mountains without roads. And that's because the East Coast at the time is becoming overpopulated. The East Coast has almost or around a million settlers already on the East Coast from all countries in Europe. And so these settlers, especially the farmers in the Virginia area, they're trying to move west so they can have more farmland. So they really have their eye on this Ohio River Valley. So next we're going to talk about Fort Necessity. So young George Washington, only about 21, 22 at this time, is ordered to tell the French to leave Fort Duquesne. Now, that doesn't look like it says Fort Duquesne, but because it is a French word, it is pronounced Fort Duquesne. And this is in present-day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So the Virginia militia is going to accidentally kill a French ambassador by mistake. Now, a French ambassador is just a communicator, someone that represents their country that will communicate with other ambassadors. And these people, you're not supposed to kill these people. They are, they're not usually carrying weapons or anything like that. They're just there to talk from someone else from another country. And in this case, as this ambassador approaches, the militia kill him. And so George Washington realizes they're in trouble and they're outnumbered by the French. And so George Washington builds Fort Necessity. He thought it was necessary to build a fort, so he builds Fort Necessity. And it's a picture, the picture is below, and it's a circular fort. And if you can look at it there, it's not very good. And so the French end up surrounding the fort. They end up capturing George Washington. and send him home embarrassed, and he's going to lose a lot of his men also. So not a good day for George Washington. So Fort Necessity was a failure. So this next person that we're going to talk about, I'll read through these points, and then we'll try to guess who it is. So this person worked as a printer for his brother's print shop. By the time he was 16, he was writing columns in his brother's newspaper. He moved to Philadelphia to open his own print shop. He retired at the age of 42. He played an important role in drafting the Declaration of Independence, and he also got the French's help in the American Revolution. He's responsible for inventing many things like the street lamps, lightning rod, and bifocal eyeglasses, and he established the first fire department and public library, things that we still use today, among many other things. He would write the Poor Richard's Almanac and have it published in the newspaper every year. And then he created the Albany Plan, which we're going to talk about today. So who was this? It was Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin is going to hold a meeting in Albany, New York, which is the capital of New York. And this is going to be known as the Albany Plan of Union. The people that come, there are going to be 7 colonies that send representatives to this meeting. And they're going to be known as the Albany Congress. So they invite colonies from all over, but only 7 show representatives. And Benjamin Franklin's main objective here is to try to create a common government. He wants a government that is in charge of all the 13 colonies. So they're still going to have their own local governments, but he wants one central government that would be in charge of all 13 colonies. And he creates this picture here that says join or die. And it's a snake cut into many different pieces. And each part of the snake is represented by a colony. So you have the head of it is NE for New England colonies. You have NY for New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. And it says join or die. And he's going to publish this in Philadelphia. And at the Albany Plan of Union, when he asked everyone to vote on whether they should have a common government, the vote is going to be 7-0 in favor of no. Okay, so everyone voted no. The Albany Plan failed, 7-0. No one was interested in having a central common government that would be over all the local governments. So why is it important? Why do we talk about the Albany Plan if it failed? So this is the first attempt to unite the colonies. At this time, they were viewed as individual colonies, not as the United States. So each individual colony, they were afraid to lose power. That's why they voted no. They did not want to give up their power. They did not want to, they feared a stronger government. They feared having possibly a king like they had in Great Britain. So they did not want that. So they wanted to, basically govern themselves and not have a central government that's in charge of them or over them. And at this time, everyone worried about just themselves. They didn't really view themselves as on the same team. So the 13 colonies at the time, everyone was kind of like their own individual player. They were not considered on a team. They didn't really look out for each other. The people in Virginia only cared about people in Virginia. The people in South Carolina only cared about people in South Carolina. The people in Massachusetts only cared about people in Massachusetts. So this is going to be part 2 of the 3.1 PowerPoint, the French and Indian War. So warm up. What were they fighting for? And that's the Ohio River Valley. And then what fort did George Washington build? That's Fort Necessity, and it was a failure. George Washington thought it was necessary to build a fort, but it did not work out. So first we have the Battle of Menagahila. So in late 1754, France is going to send over a large portion of its army to the Canada territory to protect its New France. In the late 1754, Britain is sent over many redcoat professional soldiers to America, and they were commanded by General Edward Braddock. Both Britain and France tried to secure the help of the Native Americans. Majority of them joined the French because the French treated them better. They were better friends. They were trade partners. And in June of 1755, General Edward Braddock led nearly 2,000 British soldiers and some colonial militia to the French fort, Fort Duquesne, Pennsylvania, near present-day Pittsburgh, and he was going to try to take over the same fort that George Washington could not. Now, George Washington warned Braddock that troops lined up in columns and rows made for easy targets. Now, this is the way the British fought back then. So this was common in European warfare, is for the soldiers to line up in straight rows and march in wide open fields, and they would meet up 20 yards from each other, and they would exchange gunfire. So a lot of times, the best armies were the ones that were most disciplined. And that's exactly what the Redcoats were. They were very disciplined, very well trained, to where if a British officer told them to aim, they would aim. If he told them to march, they would march. If he told them to shoot, they would shoot. If he told them to charge, they would charge. And because the Redcoats were so well trained, a lot of times they were better than most of the other European armies like the French. And so Braddock thought that they could line up in these straight rows, get in a wide open field, and march to these French and these Indians and dominate them. And George Washington warns them this is not a good idea. But he believes that the British troops are too good, that they can't be beat. So he ignores George Washington's advice. On July 9th, the French and Indians are going to ambush the British as they march alongside the Menagahila River near present-day Pittsburgh. And they were on their way to Fort Duquesne. And the French and the Indians are going to be hiding behind trees and rocks, and they're going to ambush on a surprise attack these Braddock's troops. And Braddock's troops, who are very well trained, they're not used to having surprise attacks. They like fighting in wide open fields. They like being told what to do. And the Indians taught the French how to fight, similar to how the Indians hunted. They would use camouflage. They would hunt or hide behind trees and rocks. And the Redcoats are not ready for it. And if you think the Redcoats have never fought the Indians up until this point. So they had no experience fighting the Indians, where George Washington and some of the militias, they did have experience fighting the Indians. They did realize that the Indians were smart in the way they fought. So the French and Indians attacked from behind trees and rocks. The British stood in straight lines and returned fire. So Braddock had 5 horses shot out from underneath him. Braddock was later shot and then eventually dies 4 days later. So he ignores George Washington's advice, and it costed him his life. George Washington had 2 horses shot out from underneath him, had some bullet holes in his uniform, but he survived. He led the survivors back to Virginia. Now, the British lose nearly 1,000 soldiers, artillery, and supplies. The French and Indians only lose 30. And that's because they're being smart. They're fighting behind rocks and trees, doing surprise attacks. Also know that the French are going to give weapons, firearms, to the Indians for them to use in the war. So the Indians are both using bow and arrows and rifles. So the French win the Battle of Menagahila. So Britain is going to declare war. So news of Braddock's defeat reached London, and Britain declares war on France. So now you have 2 wars going on. You have one war over in the United States, which is the French and Indian War. And then you have one war going on in Europe, which is going to be known as the 7 Years' War. So the 7 Years' War, it was considered a world war because the French, the British, and the Spanish, remember those 3 do not like each other, they all fought in Europe and some in North America. So early years of the war were disastrous for the British. Therefore, the French and Indians won most of the early battles. But that's all going to change when William Pitt takes over. So the British are going to dominate the war after William Pitt takes charge in England. He becomes the prime minister. He's going to make all the military decisions. And William Pitt says that he wanted to win the war no matter the cost. So he does not care how much money, how many resources the British have to use. He did not want to lose the war. So Pitt is going to send some of Britain's best generals, best troops, and some of their best Navy warships to America to fight this war. So British won the war. They capture the capital of Quebec, and Now, the result of that is that they are in major debt. So the British, they're going to spend so much money and resources during this French and Indian War that there is a lot of debt that they're going to have to repay. So we have the Treaty of Paris of 1763. So this ends the war. It is signed in Paris, France. So France, because they lost the war, they're going to have to give up a lot of land. They give up all of its land east of the Mississippi to England. All the land west of the Mississippi will go to Spain, including the port city of New Orleans. Now, France will get to keep 4 Caribbean islands where they will sell sugar. These islands, one of them is Haiti, okay, but it's not very much land at all. Okay, 4 Caribbean islands compared to what they had, it's a big loss for them. And then Spain is going to give up Florida to Great Britain or to England because they get the land west of the Mississippi. So on the left side, this is before the war. Okay, so all the orange right here, this was New France. Okay, here's the headquarters of Quebec that the British are going to end up capturing in the war. And the British are here in the yellow. Okay, so notice how much land the British gain, all the yellow, okay, and how much land that the French lose. Now, the Spanish, okay, they're going to give Florida up to England. In return, they're going to get most of what's called the Louisiana Territory. All right, and this little island down here, so 4 little islands down here around Haiti area is going to be what the French get to keep, and they'll sell sugar from those islands. So, result of the war, Britain acquired more land, and because land equals power, they become a superpower. Now, the negative is they have war debt that they want the colonists to pay back. The 13 colonies, they gained war experience that's going to pay off later on. But the negative is they're going to have an added tax that they are going to have to pay, many taxes they'll have to pay in order to pay back this war debt. The French lost almost all of its land in North America, but many French did stay in the U.S. So many of these French, they're living out here around the Mississippi River, around the Great Lakes that were fur trappers. They're going to stay there. They're not going to go back to France just because France lost the war. And they are no longer important in the U.S. development in the New World. So the French will cause some problems later on over in Europe, but in the New World, the French don't really give any more problems to the U.S. development. Native Americans, we have Chief Pontiac is a leader, a Indian leader that is going to attack British forts in the Great Lakes area. So if you think back to the map, there were in the New France area and all the land that they originally owned around the Great Lakes, around the Mississippi River, they had all these forts or trading posts. And once the British win this land, they're going to send people from Britain out to these forts to take control over them. And Chief Pontiac does not like this. Chief Pontiac is mad they lost the war. He likes the French. And so he's going to attack these British forts and try to give them back to the French. Okay, later on, Chief Pontiac is going to be killed by another Indian tribe. But Chief Pontiac is going to give the British some trouble around the Great Lakes area. Proclamation of 1763. So due to Chief Pontiac and these French still living out west of the Appalachian Mountains, King George III is going to create the Proclamation Line of 1763. And this is a line that the colonists could not cross. And it borders the Appalachian Mountains. And why did he make this line? He wanted to prevent future wars with the Indians or the French. We have Chief Pontiac out in the Great Lakes area causing problems. We have the French who are still living out west of the Appalachian Mountains. They're not really getting along with the British settlers. And so because of the war debt, the king wants the war to end. He does not want to continue to fight. And his number one goal after the war is to pay off this war debt. But how? You do that by taxing the colonies. So it says, discuss with the elbow partner how the colonists felt about the Proclamation Line of 1763. The colonists were angry with King George III because, due to the Proclamation Line, colonists could not settle the land they risked their life for. Many colonists crossed the proclamation line anyways. So King George III sent 10,000 British troops, known as Redcoats, to police the proclamation line, okay, which was the Appalachian Mountains. So the land that the colonists just fought for, the Ohio River Valley, is what they were trying to gain. They've risked their life to gain that land because the militias fought also alongside the Redcoats. They win this land, and now King George is telling them, you cannot cross this line. You cannot go into the Ohio River Valley. You have to stay on the East Coast where it's crowded. You farmers that just risked your life trying to win this war, thank you, but you cannot go claim new land. You cannot go claim larger farms. You have to stay where you're at. So really, the colonists gained nothing from the French and Indian War except war experience and fighting in a war. You know, that experience that they'll gain, they'll utilize later on. But as far as land-wise, they can't settle the new land, so they gain nothing. And plus, on top of that, now the British are going to start taxing the colonies. And so the result of the French and Indian War leads to the beginning of the American Revolution, which is when the colonies try to fight for their independence.